Mm.
if you're already assuming I can't do something, you're already putting me in a box of, oh, we won't do that mountain climb, or we won't do that walk, or we won't go to that movie, and that kind of turned in on I turned in on myself at that point, because I started going, is there something wrong with me? Like, as in beyond just my illness. If I'm really sick, I don't feel like I can say anything. I just have to make up a lie, or if I've got a migraine or something. And I would often actually dilute my condition as well. So I would say things like, I'm just really tired today. I've just had a big day,
Yeah.
when really I'm in absolute agony.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode on the Sick Sexy. If you're new to the channel, hi, welcome. My name is Sophia Anna. I post once a week about all things invisible illness, health, relationships, and I get to talk to some pretty awesome people along the way. This week on the Sick Sexy, I am joined by one of my oldest and closest friends, Nathan Edwards. Nathan is a professional musician who's worked across multiple bands in Australia. He's a music tutor and he works in the health industry. And this week we get up close and personal to talk about his experience living with fibromyalgia, what it's like dating in the music industry, and the hardest part about living with invisible illness. Take a look. Nathan, welcome to the Sick Sexy.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I guess to kick us off today, I have known you for the better part of 16 years, which is crazy. And to give our guests, I guess, a bit of an understanding of how we met in a very unorthodox way. So I was, I think, 14, and my primary school decided to join me up to this website called penpals.com, which is where we met. And for some crazy reason, we've somehow managed to make a 16-year friendship work, which is just insane when you think about it. And I think we bonded over a lot of things, but most importantly, we bonded over invisible illness. But over the 16 years of our friendship, I've known you as an incredibly tenacious, hard-driven, passionate human being. You're a professional musician. You have worked across multiple different bands, including your own two-piece experimental band, Dead Party Dead. You're a professional music tutor and you work in the health industry. And I know for you, most weeks look like 60-hour work weeks, which is crazy because you're hiding a pretty big secret, and that is that you live with an invisible illness. So, Nathan, can you please tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so I've been living with a thing called fibromyalgia, which is sort of categorized by, sort of having muscular pain or chronic fatigue kind of stuff. Yeah.
So my understanding of fibromyalgia is that it's kind of characterized by widespread pain throughout the body. But sometimes people get, I guess, a bit confused about where that pain comes from. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, the origins of fibro and what it feels like?
Yeah, it's still not very well known what really causes the issues per se, but from what we do sort of know that it's a lot of trauma based. So, for example, if you had a car accident or you got really, really sick or something like that, it's almost like your body kind of almost like traps the trauma inside the muscles. And so the sensation is usually somewhere along the lines of, like, if you're having a flare up, for example, you might have very sensitive skin, or just the sensation of your clothes against you can be quite painful or irritable. The level of, like, when you are healing from say if you're going to the gym or whatever, the level that it takes to kind of, get worn out or even repair that damage takes a lot longer to get over compared to, say, someone who might be more normal. So, for example, if I was to go to the gym and do leg day, my legs would probably be aching for like 2 weeks. So I would typically then avoid going to the gym after a while. And yeah,
That's yeah, it's I think it's really misunderstood as well as a condition. And you talk about how it's kind of like connected to emotional trauma.
Yeah.
I guess without like obviously not disclosing anything you're not comfortable with, but can you think about a time when like fibromyalgia became present in your life? Like, have you always lived with it? Were you born with it?
Yeah, so basically, like as far back as I could trace it is probably around when I was like 6 or 7, I had whooping cough, and yeah, it was pretty hectic. And pretty much from that day on, I was always kind of, it was almost like I never quite recovered from whooping cough. And we just sort of put it down to, oh, it's just, post viral or whatever. But what really triggered the something's not quite right is I was, as a kid, I was riding my bike and just had like a little fall. And my back went into like a spasm and it never stopped. And it still hasn't. I still have it even as I'm sitting here talking to you. It's just I've kind of learned to deal with it. And I was pretty active as a kid, still am pretty active now, but definitely not as active as when I was a child. And I would always come home with like migraines. My muscle pain was so bad that like it would bring me to the ground. I'd be like rolling the floor, and mum's going like, "I don't know what's wrong with you," and all this sort of
Wow.
stuff. Yeah, and then the headaches were kind of, I guess, dealt with in an isolated thing. It was sort of like just take Panadol or whatever.
Hmm.
Wasn't connecting to anything. So yeah, and then it kind of just progressed from that point on.
So were you like, as a kid, were you misdiagnosed by doctors? Like, did people know what it was?
No, so yeah, like I went through heaps of specialists.
Hmm.
I went to the Children's Hospital in Sydney, and yeah, there was a lot of just trial and error. We did X-rays, scans, because it was mostly to do with my back, because that was the biggest issue I was having.
Hmm.
And they were like, maybe you've got spondylolisthesis or like an unfused spine, like just something like that. But they're like, it still didn't quite connect the pain that I was having. They were like, it's all those things should be painful, but not to the point that you're having.
Yeah.
So they were just like, he's either making it up, he's got something that we just can't figure out, or like, I think at one point they even semi considered like Lyme's disease or something like that, just as a throw out thing. They were just like,
Wow.
maybe it's something like that, and
Hmm.
obviously not in the end, but
So
luckily.
how was it diagnosed in the end? How did doctors finally put their finger on the fact that it is fibromyalgia?
Okay, yeah. So basically, my mum ended up having it, and she was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Um, but she was quite sick with it. Like she couldn't get down the stairs and without being completely exhausted. And we thought she would die. We were like, whatever's wrong
Wow.
with mum, we don't know what it is, but there's no way whatever she's got is going to get her through. And she eventually kind of recovered from that a little bit over the years. And so in all of that, like I'm dealing with what I'm dealing with, and she's trying to figure that out too. So kind of like the doctors didn't really figure it out. It was kind of more mum going, maybe you should just get tested for that, because we both had whooping cough. And she was like, I don't know if that's connected to it or not. So yeah, basically she started going on that avenue with me, and sort of going, maybe you should talk to your doctor and get diagnosed and just see if it's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
so like what are the, I guess, physical tests of like testing for that? Is it just a consultation with your GP? Like what did you have to go through?
so it's different now. Basically, when I was doing it, so I got diagnosed when I was 18. So I'd been dealing with this thing for many, many years without fully understanding what's going on.
Wow.
So at the time back then, they really had no idea about it. It was almost like like a throwaway illness, where they're just kind of like, maybe it's fibromyalgia, and it's like, that's just all it is.
Wow.
Um, and so I think what you had to do was, there was a physical test for triggers
Hmm.
in your muscles.
Hmm.
So you'd go to obviously a doctor who is allowed to test for that. And basically they've got this like graph of a human body, and they just kind of go like, point to all the spots that you feel the most pain, And then they kind of run through all those trigger points. That is, I think it's something like 18 or 23 to some number. I can't remember now. And basically I had all of them. They were like, pushing here and on my back and all through my body. And I think I might have missed like one maybe, but like I was like, oh. And as a kid, an 18-year-old, I was probably also a little bit fighting the pain as well, because I didn't want to come across as like a wuss that I couldn't handle pain or whatever. Because that's how I'd kind of grown up with my mates and stuff. Was But yeah, once that was done, they went, yeah, well, according to this test, you have fibromyalgia, and yeah, it kind of put a lot of pieces together at that point. So
yeah, absolutely. And did you kind of feel like relieved having this diagnosis now, like understanding why you had gone through that pain? And
yes and no. I think it created a lot of anxiety around just the fact that there wasn't much knowing about this illness. The fact that I'd seen my own mother with it in a really bad way, I was like, is that going to be the direction that I'm going in? I'm just so young still that it hasn't kicked in yet.
Yeah.
So I was kind of somewhat scared that I was going to be at a point where I couldn't leave my own house, that I was just going to become agoraphobic or something. But then on the other side, it did kind of make me go, okay, so maybe the back pain that I've been feeling, or the fact that when, my mates and I fight and stuff and we like punch up and whatever, that explains why I can't take a punch compared to them. Like I'd hit them pretty hard, and when they hit me, they're like, that's not really that hard. But it would like burn. It was like
just to clarify, we're talking like play fighting here. We're not talking actual like just professional fighting.
Yeah, we're not just suddenly in martial arts or something like that.
Cool.
So there was a lot of fear, and it definitely pushed me into a slightly self-sabotaging kind of perspective as well, because I would purposely stop going out with certain friends because they're a bit too active for me. And then, it kind of turned into a bit more of a like, didn't go with anyone. And then I was, there's a few other factors in there I'm sure we'll get into a bit later.
Yeah.
But, like it was pretty lonely at some points. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think as well, like when you're diagnosed, because 18's pretty young still to be diagnosed with an illness, but also like you're at that point in your life where everyone around you is just having fun, and you're at the end of high school, and you're trying to kind of keep up with your peers and have a good time, and then it's like you're faced with this huge diagnosis, and it's like, how do you balance those two? And being a teenager already, like you already feel like misunderstood as a teenager, and then you add invisible illness to it, and it's like no one understands what you're going through. So that must have been really challenging. I guess if we like fast forward to now, do you still feel misunderstood living with fibromyalgia?
Yes and no. Probably more on the yes side, because people still don't really know what it is. Although I have been hearing a lot more people with it, and that it's becoming a more not common, but it's getting more widely recognized as an actual thing. They're actually starting to go more like, let's test for this more than we used to, because we're starting to find that there's some connections to trauma and illnesses, and so it's almost like part of their checklist now is like, maybe let's check chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, whatever. So
wow. And like I was just going to ask, like with the chronic fatigue side of things, because that's a pretty big symptom of your condition, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a separate diagnosis, but 9 times out of 10, if you've got fibromyalgia, there's a form of chronic fatigue there, because realistically, when you think about fibromyalgia, the muscle fatigue in general causes fatigue. So, like I mentioned earlier about going to the gym and stuff, you would, you'd be way more exhausted than you should be, even if you didn't go that hard, or, and then the time it takes for those muscles to heal so that you can get back to walking again or lifting a weight again, it's so much further apart. So there's that element of chronic fatigueness. But that's a different diagnosis when they apply it. So
It's kind of like holistically applied together, because if you experience one, you're most likely going to experience the other when it comes to fibro. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, like talking about the gym, because I think, for myself as well, like if I go to the gym and I like over exercise, I know that like it's not just going to be a normal muscle recovery. It's going to be a week where it's like my muscles just don't repair. And so I think it's interesting because when you go to the gym, the aim is to break down your muscles so that they grow back stronger. But I think when you live with an invisible illness, it's really important to be aware that that's not always the case, and you can actually end up doing more damage than good. So I guess if we look at like the last 16 years of your life balancing your condition, like you do a lot. Like I've always said this, like you're one of the busiest people I know. How the heck do you balance everything from like your music career to working in the health industry, and then your condition? Like how does that all tie together for you?
Yeah, it's been a long process actually. So I currently use a system. It's like a point system basically. So when I was at my worst, when I was younger, I didn't have a point system back then, but I might have only had 10 points. Some people call them spoons. I use points, a bit easier to math out. So fast forwarding from that point, I've kind of gotten to a point where I can have at least, I don't know, like say 30 points, and that's a pretty good amount, say. So for example, hanging washing out might be like 5 points. Going out for coffee might be 10 points because you have to like drive. You have to then find parking. You might have to walk somewhere, so that can be pretty chewy uppy of your points. And then obviously going to work is going to chew up even more points because it's physically demanding or whatever. So over the 16 years since even we met, I've just been progressively kind of improving those points. Not super intentionally when I was younger, but as I started needing to work more, having a chef background, that's kind of when I really realized that I needed to take control over how I manage my life, because the chefing thing was destroying me. So I basically, like I said, it was a very slow process. So I kind of started with things that I could do for work, and even musically as well. So I wasn't touring heaps or like rehearsing with 30 different bands, or it was a very over time snowballing effect. And then now when I'm sort of working the hours that I'm working now, I've essentially just sort of built a resistance, I guess. So I gig quite a lot. I rehearse with a lot of different people. Recently going into the health industry and doing disability support work, which is both mentally and physically draining.
Yeah.
And the hours could be pretty ridiculous, like 6 till 2 or 2 till 10, or even overnight shifts and stuff like that. I live by my calendar a lot, so I try to plan as best as I can. Sometimes I don't get it right all the time, and that's usually when I have what I call a flare up.
Yeah.
Which is if I accidentally do a 14-day work fortnight, or I've worked every day, including gigs, because I incorporate all that into my my weekly routine. Yeah, that's a big one, and that's when I start to go, oh.
And what does so for you, like what does a flare up look like, feel like? How do you know when you're like, how do you know when that's about to happen?
Well, it's a weird analogy to use, but I refer to it a lot like a Labrador, where Labradors have an eating problem where they don't know when to stop until it's too late and their stomachs twist. So that's a little bit like my condition, where you don't actually feel it in the moment. You don't go, I'm doing something and then, oh, maybe I need to slow down. It's not until usually the next day or even like 72 hours later. And then you've got to go to backtrack and go, what did I do that caused that? So the flare-ups are typically like muscle aches, and it's isolated too sometimes. Sometimes it's everywhere. Sometimes it's just in my... So I think it was yesterday or the day before, it was all in my left leg. And that's because I was driving a lot. So the clutch thing was what I was like thinking about. in terms of why it's my left leg specifically.
Wow. Okay.
And depending on how bad the flare up is, because to me it's a spectrum of that leg thing, it went away after a few days. But a big flare up would be like, just if you could imagine, if you've just worked all week and you're already on your low battery, and then you plug your phone into charge, but it doesn't charge overnight, so it actually stays on 13%. So then you wake up and you're still on 13%.
You're on 13%. Yeah, right. So you haven't had a chance to like fully get back up to full operating capacity.
Yeah. So I'd just be laying in bed and just be like, I just have to take 2 days off, and essentially lay in bed for most of the day. That's a bad one for me, at least, anyway.
Does that happen very often?
It used to happen almost at least once a week at some point.
Yeah.
And that was probably roughly when I was also studying at uni. I was touring with a band that I'd been with for 6 years. So we're all over the country at some points, and we drove most of that as well. So we weren't flying or anything like that. So
that's intense.
So we'd be driving to Queensland, let's say South Australia then, but like Victoria and just all up the coast, and it was nuts. And all the rehearsals and stuff like that too. On top of working and going to uni, and
crazy. But do you feel like, because what I'm hearing from you is that basically like going is a trigger for you, and constantly driving, constantly rehearsing, constantly kind of pushing yourself past like your limit is what causes a trigger. But also for you, music is at the center of your world. So like, talk to me a little bit about, because something must be driving you to keep going. Talk to me a little bit about music and how it's supported you to keep going in those times when you're like, I just want to give up.
Yeah, actually that's a really good sort of topic there, because it's been, not to sound dramatic, but it's definitely been a savior in my life personally. I've chosen the worst instrument to play as someone with fibromyalgia, being a drummer, carrying gear and all that. But it's been a form of therapy, both mentally and physically as well, because it was at one point almost the only thing that I could do that was sort of like the gym. So I could play for 2 hours drumming, and I'd be exhausted, but it'd be the best feeling of exhaustion that I could get, compared to, say, if I went for a 2-hour walk and was just wrecked, I'd be like, cool, now I can't do anything for the rest of the day, but
but it was like, it was worth it because it was music and you were like fully immersed. And you're talking about like playing for yourself, or are you talking about like the feeling you get from a crowd of people when you're playing on stage?
Probably more, I think from a therapeutic perspective, probably more for myself. But in terms of the overall everything, definitely like when I'm on stage and performing, it energizes me. It doesn't seem to drain me or anything like that. But despite all the exhaustion of carrying gear and all that sort of stuff, I still found myself going, it's still worth it, because for me, I love music so much to the point of I almost am okay with flare-ups, or it's slightly masochistic almost. It's like I don't thrive on the pain or anything like that, but I'm not afraid of the pain in that circumstance.
It's almost like it's worth it, because like the time that you sacrifice, it's almost like you're getting something so much more out of that. And it's interesting because like I feel like I talk to a lot of people who have some really chronic health conditions, and the one thing that keeps them going is their passion. And like in Japanese, there's a saying called your ikigai, and it's like it's just a thing that makes you feel most alive, basically. And it's really special when you get to talk to people who like they all have that something, and that something for you is music. And I think as well, that's why we connect, and connected from such a young age, because for me, music has always been like a way to escape. escape what's going on around me. Like when I go to hospital, it's like the needles are not coming anywhere near me until my earphones are in my ears, and I've got like my favorite band blasting, and like people pay me out at hospital. They're like, oh, you know, you and your music, and it's like it's the one thing that makes it all okay. It's the only thing for me that like helps me get into a different headspace so that it's like I can cope with what's going on around me. It's going to be okay because I'm somewhere else. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's so, so special. Can you tell us a little bit about like your music journey, like what projects you're working on at the moment? Tell us about Dead Party Dead. I want to hear it all.
Well, being a session player, and I'm also in different projects as well, it's given me a lot of experiences to perform multiple genres, and stuff that's not even like bandy stuff. It's like almost orchestral. So I've worked with a guy named Craig Brady, and his wife Tarumi, who was also my lecturer at uni, through like microtonal stuff, a lot of melodic percussion, which is sort of where I started getting interested in it. And then from there, I was in country bands, metal bands, like jazz bands, wedding bands, like everything.
Amazing.
And so the journey through that was interesting because when I was younger as a musician, people weren't giving me a go. There was a lot of this gatekeeping kind of stuff going on, which was pretty soul crushing as a drummer because I knew that I had the skills to do what they were doing. They just wouldn't let me have a go, which is really weird to think back on now because I've done so much.
Mm-hmm.
So coming to now with all the stuff that I've sort of done, I've sort of moved into my own project called Dead Party Dead, which is a synthwave noise performance art sort of thing. It's a bit hard to categorize. It's an enigma, that's for sure. So it's with my friend Troy, who's from another project called Cheap Coffins. And so we basically have synths. So I've actually got one just here that I use a lot with all those little pedals there.
Epic.
And we essentially set up in a way, it's all about juxtapositions. It's a form of therapy for us as well. That's actually where the project was stemmed from. So I'd gone through some pretty serious stuff recently, and that's where it was born from. It was like, you know what, when we do a gig, it's if you're feeling like this is how the show's going to run. It's meant to be all improv. So
amazing.
So we wear full-on suits and gas masks and all that sort of stuff. So it's like nice looking, but then what the hell? And then
so cool.
Yeah, and then
very new age, very like sci-fi almost. Yeah, love it.
It's a wild ride. And then we serve like party food. So we like have suitcases with food in it and coffee, and we kind of serve people out of that. It's a whole thing. But it's very cathartic, that project. We did a gig recently, and I actually passed out on stage. I'd gotten to a point where I was so in it that I just like disappeared for like 5 seconds, and when I came to, I was on the ground, and Troy's sitting on me, like still playing bass on top of me, and I'm like, oh, I'm all right now, just picking the microphone back up. And
so it's kind of like you have like a bit of an out of body experience. We're not just talking, because you do a lot of, I guess, traditional sets as well, but I guess that's more like controlled, whereas this is just like you just having the opportunity to almost go on like a bit of a trip, but like not drug induced. It's just like you're one with the music. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% exactly what it is. It's also not super noisy either. Like I've mentioned this to a few people in the industry, and they've gone, "Oh, noise." It's like, we're a lot more melodic than just us throwing things against walls or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
And not that there's anything against those kind of projects. I actually love that kind of stuff. It's just that we kind of wanted to take it in a different direction without going to like a band. We're sitting somewhere in that weird sort of gap, that grey area.
I love that. And how long has Dead Party Dead been like a concept and been live? Like how long have you guys done it for?
I think we're coming up to, I think we've been going for about 5 months now. We sort of started around March sort of thing.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
So backtracking a little bit, we know that like in your industry in particular, drummers get a lot of attention. And, you know, like dating in that industry is hard because you're always on tour, you're always working, you're always busy. But for you in particular, like you also live with an invisible illness. Can you tell us a little bit about like your experience in the dating world? Has it been difficult dating with an invisible illness, being on tour, being in that industry?
Yeah, there's a lot of yeah. It's been difficult. You know, especially in the early days when I really was on tour a lot. You know, I went through a couple of relationships, all long term, but they always sort of got to a point where I just wasn't super available, or they weren't willing to kind of compensate for the lifestyle. And I wasn't living anything hectic. Like I wasn't doing like 6 month tours or anything like that. It was just short stints, but very often. That's all. Um, the other thing, yeah, was just that with the invisible illness of fibromyalgia, I would often get to a point where I felt confident enough to tell them that I had it, and not after years or anything like that, pretty early on.
Yeah.
But it would always turn into either not pity, but it was like almost like they couldn't sit well with it. They were always kind of like either, oh, is this too much? Is this too much? Or it's like, well, that's fine. I'll let you know what's going on.
So just to clarify, when you say like people were saying to you, is this too much? Are you talking about skin to skin contact? Like, because that's something that I recently found out about your condition, is that you can be really sensitive to touch. So is that a conversation that was coming up a lot where people were like a little bit apprehensive to get close to you because of that?
Not necessarily apprehensive to get close, but just always very cautious, and almost to an irritating level where it's like, I'll let you know if I get to a point where I can't do something or interact. But if you're already assuming I can't do something, you're already putting me in a box of, you know, oh, we won't do that mountain climb, or we won't do that walk, or we won't go to that movie, and that kind of turned in on I turned in on myself at that point, because I started going, is there something wrong with me? Like, as in beyond just my illness, that I wasn't capable of being in relationships, because I kept always getting to the same spot where they just didn't understand where I was coming from, didn't want to understand. Every time we talked about things, it would never go anywhere. They just shut off, or want to change the topic. Yeah.
Have you ever found that you've had that kind of reaction among your friends as well?
Yeah, definitely in sort of all forms of relationships I've had in the past. Obviously, with friends, it's a bit different compared to, say, a romantic relationship, because you can just be like, oh, you know, that's cool. Like, we'll just won't hang out today or whatever. And you just kind of keep going, and, you know.
Yeah.
But there was definitely, a few friends in the past who just really didn't get it, didn't want to get it. And that's totally fine. But yeah, you definitely start to sort of go, well, I can't really talk too much about anything, because if I'm really sick, I don't feel like I can say anything. I just have to make up a lie, or if I've got a migraine or something. And I would often actually dilute my condition as well. So I would say things like, I'm just really tired today. You know, I've just had a big day, you know.
Yeah.
When really I'm in absolute agony.
Yeah.
So, and that would often then trigger them to think, oh, it's not so bad. And then when I would have really bad flare-ups, they're like, what's going on? I'm like,
yeah,
I don't really know how to like explain it, you know.
It's hard, and it's like it's so relatable what you're saying, because like I feel like when you live with invisible illness, you do live with like a level of guilt, because it's like you're trying to operate at the same standard as everyone else all the time, and then when you can't, it's really hard to communicate that, because it's like, well, you've known me at this standard, and suddenly I'm not feeling well, and you don't really you don't get it. And it's really tricky. And I think, especially in romantic relationships, it's so important to, you know, be with people that make you feel safe and make you feel understood. What's like the best way that you know how to educate people on your illness and like help them to understand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just having open dialogue about it. it's not something that you can catch or anything like that. Like, so it's not, and usually none of these invisible illnesses aren't like that anyway. But just that there's an open dialogue to actually just talk about it and not be afraid of going, okay, well, we might get a bit deep. We might talk about things that are a bit uncomfortable. But also just to just do a quick Google search. Like 9 times out of 10, there's something there that someone's talked about, and you wouldn't even have to do a big research thing anyway. But I think just being aware, just awareness, really.
Yeah. Do you think that we have enough awareness around fibromyalgia, or do you think we could be doing better as a society?
Yeah, I think we could be doing better, but I feel like that's kind of with everything, though. We could always strive to be better, being aware, but it's also a condition that gets quite often missed as a diagnosis. So I think it's not always in people's, it's not in the forefront of everyone's minds to go, oh, it might be fibro. So I have a friend who recently got diagnosed with a few different things. I won't go into them, but she was like, what's your condition like? So she was like, I know that you've got fibromyalgia, and I feel like I have similar symptoms. Like, can you describe it to me? And they were very, very similar. So I said, go get tested for it. And I think it's actually a blood test now, I think.
Oh, wow. So you can have a blood test to get tested for fibromyalgia?
I believe so. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure there's a different test now. It's not so much the trigger point thing anymore.
Yeah, right. Okay. Interesting.
So, but yeah, in the end, she didn't have it. It was chronic fatigue and a bunch of other things.
Interesting. Yeah.
That were masking the symptoms of fibromyalgia. So there's a lot of that as well. So
it sounds like there's a lot of misdiagnosis, a lot of misunderstanding, but it also sounds like from when you were diagnosed to now, there's better, I guess, like medical ways to diagnose. And it sounds like it's less likely to be missed if you actually go and see your doctor about it, which is really cool.
Yeah, I'm finding a lot of doctors know about it as well. Like there was a point in time when I was getting diagnosed that people were like, fibro what? Like what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Whether even like my osteopaths that I've seen, my not OTs, but just other specialists and whatever. The minute you bring up fibromyalgia, they're like, yeah, I've heard of that, or I've actually studied it, or so one of my osteopaths that I was seeing quite regularly, they had actually kind of in a way they specialized in it. They were like, I do osteopath on people with fibromyalgia, and I understand how to kind of treat the muscles and not go too deep or whatever.
Which is so important. It's so important to have people like specialists that understand your condition and know not to push you, because I've definitely been in situations with physiotherapists who have been like, push through the pain, and it's like, but I can't. So, having an osteopath that actually gets it is so important. Like, what does treatment look like for you now? Like, what does the rest of your life look like living with fibro? How do you manage it?
Yeah, so treatment, I found for me personally, and everyone is different. I took treatment more of a natural kind of way. So I tried to go more for like osteopath, eating reasonably well, taking vitamins, trying to avoid things that are going to cause flare-ups as best as I can without being antisocial. And yeah, things like just keeping weight under control, just generally trying to stay active as well, but within my limits as well, like not just going too overboard and then crashing.
Like referring back to your point system and making sure that you're not doing anything crazy.
Yeah, so there's definitely, so I've lost a bit of weight recently, because that was one of the triggers too, that I was like, I need to start bringing everything back together again, because I'd sort of let things go a bit, and as we all do. And
for sure,
I noticed a big difference that when I had lost a bit of weight, that my daily energy levels had gone up. Now, that's not going to be the same for every person with fibromyalgia. So I know weight loss is a huge battle for people with it.
Okay.
Because of how active you can be. And when you're on that lower spectrum, yeah, you can't even get down sets of stairs without being like, oh, I need to go to bed. So
So when you say lower spectrum, what do you mean? Is that how you categorize like your flare ups?
so the lower spectrum thing, I'm sort of categorizing in terms of um, like your level of, yeah, I suppose, yeah, your level of flare ups. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably higher on the spectrum where
Mm-hmm.
I can have a flare up nowadays and sort of recover fairly quickly and sort of get back to my normal routine reasonably quickly.
Right.
Whether
Okay.
if you're lower on the spectrum, you
Mm-hmm.
might hang a load of washing out,
Mm-hmm.
and that would wreck you for 3 days.
Yeah.
Whether
Right.
I
Okay.
don't have that problem anymore, or really
So
ever
it sounds
did.
like something that like it's not just static. It's not like, once you got the condition, that's it. It's kind of like it moves up and down throughout the continuum throughout your life. And I wonder if like that is at all tied to mental health and emotional well-being. Do you think that mental health kind of like impacts on that?
Absolutely. I found my mental health was definitely deteriorating. Um, Probably when I was at uni, actually, because I wasn't able to play my instrument like I would normally be able to when I was living at home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so as I was sort of feeling like, because even back then, I still didn't really know where I was going with fibromyalgia. I didn't quite know if I was going to get worse or better, or so there was a lot of just uncertainty, and that freaked me out a lot too. And so I started going like, am I going to be one of those people that I just have to like, I stay at home all the time. I can't play my instrument anymore. Is it just going to turn into I just become a shell of a human being? I don't know. And that uncertainty, yeah, really played a major role in how I was approaching life for a little while.
Yeah.
I definitely, I wouldn't say I was afraid of life or anything like that, but everything was apprehensive. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, do I go to work that day? Oh, do I hang out with that friend that day? Do I, you know,
Mm.
if I sleep in too long, is that going to affect this? Like everything was just like micromanaged. Um,
And how do you deal with that now? Because like obviously you still have to like structure your life in a way that like you have like your condition and then everything around it, and you need to ensure that you're not going to trigger yourself too much, I guess. How do you keep your mental health in check now, so that that doesn't happen?
um, I think I think for me now, making healthier habits within that routine that I already have now. So
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't change anything and I just worked and did gigs and whatever and didn't do anything else, I probably would crash and burn pretty quickly, which I was at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started going, okay, even though I can't play drums in my apartment, I
Mm-hmm.
do have a studio down the road that I can rent out. It's not that expensive. Um, I'm just going to rent it out once a week and just play some drums. It doesn't matter if it's for rehearsal, and it doesn't even matter if it is a rehearsal for myself. It's just me on my own.
It's just for you.
Yeah, it's just like well, I don't know what the word is, but when it's almost like when animals are in that fight or flight thing, and
Mm-hmm.
they do that shaking thing that they do after they've done the running away of the predator. It's a little bit like my little shake.
I love that.
Yeah, and it's
It's how
huge.
like you bring your like nervous system back down to a level. Yeah, I love that
Yeah.
so much. Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely detox when I do that. But the other thing that's changed a lot for me too, or that I've sort of grown from, is having healthier relationships with people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is always a work in progress. I'm still, there's some stuff I'm still working on, but like just making more of an effort to, see people, talk to people, have dialogue about things that are pretty deep and meaningful
Yeah.
or a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found when I started doing that more often with people that I trusted, not just randoms on the street,
Yeah.
um, I found that was quite helpful as well, because I was no longer just in my head all the time. Um,
Mm.
and I didn't really ever struggle too much with mental health. Like I wouldn't say I was ever, oh my goodness, I might need to go to a doctor and get Valium or something like that. Um, but I think it's because of music that was delayed. So when music stopped, or even though it did stop, but when it got reduced, that's when kind of the mental health thing started to boil out, and that's when I went, oh, okay, what did I do before that stopped that from boiling over? And that was, playing music. And I associate a lot of my passions and stuff through music too. So like with my disability work, I try to always
Mhm.
feed in some kind of level of music because I know what it can do. I'm not a therapist or anything like that. I'm not qualified, but music is so therapeutic that when I'm with clients or whatever, and I whip out a keyboard, like their faces light up,
It's
and
amazing.
I just noticed that they've lost 30 minutes of just not thinking about their condition or the
Yeah.
environment they're in. And I'm like, yeah, and that's exactly what it's like for me. I get 2 hours of just like, didn't think about bills, didn't think about past
Yep.
relationships, didn't, you know, anything like that. So it's
It's
fantastic.
such like an immersive experience. I think it goes back to like no matter what you're going through, music is that one thing that can just bring you back to the present moment. And like we've talked about this, off the podcast about how music is very much mindfulness. And,
Mm.
like people talk about how, when you work in the health sector, you can burn out really quickly and how you need to find things in your life that are mindful. And like people talk about TV and like going for jogs, and it's like, well, but music is such a huge one that we miss all the time, and we could just kind of like ignore it or like don't put importance on it, and it's so important. I think it's really cool that you incorporate that as part of your job. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, because this is something you've talked about before in the sessions that you do with your kids.
Yeah.
You use like a really cool technique to bring kids down to like to basically regulate them emotionally. Can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about what that is?
Yeah. So, um, because of my experiences through disability and also having family with disabilities as well, a lot of my tutoring kids have ended up being like NDIS related, or I'm usually thrown a lot of the more difficult kind of students because I
Mhm.
love it. Like I love trying to find ways that can access their minds, that takes them out of that world, that chaos that they have. So one of the techniques that I use is this. Well, I actually got it from a book, which I think is somewhere up there. Oh yeah, it's in that book. So it's like a, it's called the Storm Game essentially, and it's nothing out of this world. It's not gonna, you know, break break barriers down and like that. But basically, the this one kid that I had, he had ADHD, and he was just chaos the entire time, like on the floor, sliding, doing the worm, like he was everywhere.
Mhm.
And so I played this storm game with him, which is essentially you're trying to get them to imagine a storm approaching and leaving, and all the little steps that happen leading up to that. So, for example, storms don't just suddenly happen. There's a build up. There's wind. There's a bit of rain. The rain gets heavier. The wind gets heavier. Then you start hearing distant thunder. Thunder turns into lightning, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then obviously when they disappear, they don't just stop either. So there's all these other steps as they leave.
Mhm.
So I will get them to, depending on what they've got, if there's anything to do with like sensory or whatever, but typically they're usually okay with touching a snare drum or something like that. And it's, yeah, like wind is created through sweeping on the drum. Um, and that kind of gets them to focus on just, oh, I just have to make that sound. And watching their temperament just kind of go like this is really interesting because they don't know that's happening, but I'm watching it as it goes.
Wow.
And it's really easy to bring them back to. So if they start
Mhm.
going like this again, it's very easy to go, hey, we're still doing a storm. Storms don't just suddenly happen. We've got to, and then getting them to express things without it being so like, this is a drum beat or this is a chord, or it just gets them out of that whole music is a theory thing, or you have to be
Mhm.
talented at it, or
Mhm.
and just watching them be mindful of their own movement as well. Like, I want you to tap something that sounds like rain. So they have to kind of think, okay, tapping, what am I going to tap? And then watching all the cogs turn in their head. And before you know it, we've gotten to the storm level, which is to do with, well, it's a bit like what I was saying earlier with the shaking out of the fight or flight thing, just detoxing. And it's like they
Mhm.
get to just hit as hard as they want for as long as they want. And then when they kind of feel like they're going to calm down, they usually do it themselves, and they
Mhm.
kind of go, okay, I can't stay at that level for that long. I get tired, so they start going
Mhm.
down, I'll guide them back out as the storm passes, and we'll
I
do
love
that
that.
for a full 30 minutes. And yeah, they usually end up leaving pretty calm.
That's amazing.
Depending,
It sounds incredibly therapeutic, and I think as human beings we kind of need an outlet to express ourselves. And I think in our society, like we don't really allow people to do that, especially like in a school setting or in a work setting. So I think having that practice where it's like, yeah, it's okay for you to get to a level where you're like releasing those frustrations and releasing like how you feel, but in a really kind of mindful way, you know, in a way that you're not hurting yourself or hurting other people. So I love that. I think that's epic, and I think it's really cool that that's a practice that you kind of include in your music sessions, because I had never heard of it before, and I just think it's really cool. So thank you for sharing that. Lastly, what projects are you currently working on, and Nathan, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm currently, obviously, we talked about Dead Party Dead. So that's my kind of originals sort of thing. I'm also in a Tool tribute band called 10,001 Days. And you can basically find us all on the usual social medias, Facebook, Instagram. If you just type in any of those names, 10,001 Days as numbers, or Dead Party Dead, all sort of one word. Yeah, the other stuff I'm in is more session based. So, but you can find me on social media, obviously. Yeah.
Awesome. We will link your socials in the description down below. So you guys can go check out Nathan's music and his work, and go give Dead Party Dead a follow and give it some love. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so honoured and blessed to have you here with us. Go check Nathan's music out, and welcome to this week's episode of The Sick Sexy, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Thank you.